As Beijing rebounded from the first pandemic wave, analysts made a bold prediction: China would become the world's largest economy by 2028. Today, that forecast has shifted. The timeline has been pushed back at least 15 years, and as structural roadblocks pile up, analysts doubt it will happen at all. Economic data coming out of Beijing points to an engine losing momentum. Industrial production has hit its weakest point since mid-2023, and year-over-year retail sales have slowed to just 0.2%. This freeze is rooted in the property market. When China's massive real estate bubble burst, it depleted the primary savings of millions of ordinary citizens. People are now paying off loans for apartments they can't sell. This financial trap has frozen domestic demand, as consumers stop spending while their primary source of wealth evaporates. This caution is visible in the auto market. For a rising middle class, buying a car has traditionally been the next major financial step after securing a home, but most households can no longer afford that investment. At the electric vehicle giant BYD, a massive stockpile of unsold cars has built up, and first-quarter profits dropped by 55%. Those rows of stationary cars highlight the disconnect within the economy. The factory floor is still running, but the domestic buyers have disappeared. China's superpower status was built on an export-led growth model. Following reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping in 1980, the country became the world's factory, lifting tens of millions out of poverty. But that model relies on selling outward rather than inward. In the United States, domestic consumption drives 80% of growth. In India, it's 70%. In China, that share is only 52%. The property slump, combined with a weak social safety net, has left consumers unwilling to spend. Without those internal buyers, the 52% figure is unlikely to rise. A system built to sell to the world cannot easily pivot when its own citizens cannot afford the goods they produce. To compensate for weak domestic demand, Beijing is building more factories to pump even more cheap products into the global market. This push is creating friction abroad. A flood of underpriced goods is hurting local industries in ASEAN countries, while heavy investment in Africa is increasingly viewed as an attempt to exploit local resources. Meanwhile, the war in Iran has driven up the cost of oil and gas. For Chinese factories, rising energy and plastic costs are narrowing profit margins that were already under pressure from international tariffs. The international market is no longer willing to absorb China's surplus, leaving its massive industrial capacity with nowhere to go. Internal liabilities are also mounting. Officially, Beijing claims a manageable budget deficit of 4% of its GDP. But accounting for the complex provincial system, including government funds, state capital, and social insurance, reveals a much larger gap. The total deficit climbs to 9.1%. The total debt to GDP ratio has now topped 300%. This level of borrowing now exceeds that of the United States and the Eurozone. Servicing these liabilities now consumes a larger portion of the national budget. Since 2013, interest payments alone have grown by 341%. This outward projection of industrial power is sustained by an economy borrowing cash to maintain its basic operations. Beyond the debt, the country faces a human capital crisis. The birth rate has fallen to its lowest level since 1949. With a rising death rate and falling births, China is projected to lose nearly 60 million people over the next decade. A shrinking, aging population permanently locks in the crisis of low consumption. There simply aren't enough young people to drive the next wave of growth. The era of the unstoppable miracle has ended. The global market must now prepare for an economy weakened by high debt and a shrinking demographic.